Hello, everyone. I am totally wired for this talk, I'll tell you. I got 4 microphones. There's microphones I don't even know about on here. So I hope it goes well. You can hear me? So the title of the talk, Are Science and Faith Friends, Enemies, or Frenemies? Perhaps you remember like a classic movie clip where the bad guy pulls out a gun and holds it to the head of the victim and says, your money or your life. And that's a bit dramatized, of course, but I feel like our society is increasingly pushing us in that direction to say, are you going to go with the science, or are you going to keep your anti-science mythological beliefs and be left out? And this is a battle that's been going on for 100 years, but I think it's been gaining momentum lately. It's a battle between what God says in the Bible, where God clearly tells us that he was involved in creating everything that's here, all of us, and that he made us in his image. You know, what is a better compliment you could pay to someone than say, you were made in God's image, right? And we're distinct from animals and from other forms of life. And God has given us a purpose. You're here for a purpose. Your purpose is to love other people and to love your God, right? On the other hand, science seems to be telling us a very different picture, that you are a collection of millions of mistakes accumulated over a couple billion years. You're no different than any other life form. You're just a little more lucky, perhaps, because you have a few more mutations that have accumulated. And unfortunately, you have no purpose. You're just lucky to be here, so enjoy your life, and then you're gone. So that's the battle. And if you think I'm kind of over-dramatizing it, I'll show you some of what is going on this side of the battle. All the soldiers here that are taking aim at you. This is a high school biology textbook, and it says right in there, a quote, life arose from non-life via chemical evolution. So it's explaining to all the students how life got started. It got started by chemicals bumping into each other and evolving over time. And if you think that's really a weird book, well, here's another biology textbook for high school. Life began when organic molecules assembled in a coordinated manner within a cell membrane and began reproducing. So these are stated as hard, cold facts to teach our kids. And as I'll show you, or I can happy to talk about it, but science doesn't support those statements, actually. Those are statements not supported by science, but they're being taught. This is about cosmology. This is about the origin of the universe, how the universe came to be. And Larry Krauss likes to explain how everything came from nothing. Nothing exploded and then made everything. So that's his book with his quote on there. And he had a little interview with Richard Dawkins. I think you might find interesting. I'm going to play a clip. I hope it works. This is Larry Krauss and Richard Dawkins.
Because I don't know if you've had this happen, but I've had people write me saying, I'm a medical doctor, and I don't believe in evolution.
That's a disgrace.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to say that because, especially in this country, one's private beliefs are supposed to be irrelevant. But I would walk out of a doctor's office and not consult him anymore if I heard that he said that. Because what that doctor is saying is that he's a scientific ignoramus and a fool.
Okay, isn't that a nice British way to insult you? You're a scientific ignoramus. It's very nice. So hopefully you're feeling a little bit of tension of this battle that I'm portraying here, right? Because it's real. Back to this. So, and then we have Bill Nye the Science Guy. Bill Nye is actually doing a tour right now. I think you could pay something like $75 to see him. I think he's coming to town soon. But he wrote a book, Undeniable. I saw there's a copy over here in that library. And in that book it says the origin of life just requires some raw material that could allow the spark of life to emerge. So the start of life is just so easy, right? So obvious. And then this one is a real punch in the jaw here. It's actually titled Faith versus Fact. Which one are you going to pick? And this is Jerry Coyne. Jerry Coyne lays out in clear, dispassionate detail why the toolkit of science, based on reason and empirical study, is reliable, whereas that of religion leads to incorrect, untestable, or conflicting conclusions. Okay, so you can feel the battle going on right there. So it's my job, I think it's my calling in a way, to try to bring an end to this battle, to try to bring peace. And there's a lot of people trying to do that in different ways. Some people try to bring peace by turning their back on their faith. They say, well, science has disproven everything that's in the Bible, you can't trust it, and I'm done with that, and they turn their back on their faith. I don't recommend that. Some people have turned their back on science, and they say, oh, science is always making these claims that I don't believe, and people trying to tell me to do stuff, I don't believe that. I wouldn't recommend that either, because I'm a scientist. I think science does a lot of good things. Some people try to resolve the conflict by changing what the Bible says into what scientists say the Bible should say. Just kind of rewriting a little bit, reinterpreting. I don't recommend that either. Because I think the real problem lies over here, what science seems to be telling us. Because in fact, science doesn't say anything. It's the scientists who say things, right? And like all humans, scientists can be kind of proud and they want to push God out of the picture because they can figure stuff out. Instead of having God be in his natural place, God above us, there's an increasing tendency, I think, to replace God by science. And if that sounds kind of dramatic to have science be your God, I think a lot of people today, if you interviewed them and said, hey, if you were diagnosed with cancer, what gives you hope that you'll have a brighter future? What gives you hope from that? And they'll say something related to science. Medicine is part of science. That's kind of what their God has become. The problem is, there's a lot of problems to that. But if you let science be your God, then your God isn't limited, right? Science has no limitations. Science can answer everything. It can do everything for you. That's where a lot of problems come from. There's two big limitations of science that I'd like to talk about. And I think they're causing scientists to interpret things and push things upon us that's actually creating this battle. Number one, scientists constrain science so that it can only consider natural, undirected explanations. So, I mean, we've all experienced that and benefited from it, right? We used to think lightning, long ago, lightning was something that God did, right? And if you kind of push that aside and do science and figure out how lightning actually happens, you find out, it's not God striking you at that moment. So there's good to it. This has a fancy name. It's called methodological naturalism. Big fancy name. But basically it means when you practice science, the method assumes naturalism. Science deals with natural explanations. It explains natural laws. So it's part of science for some people. And I'm a scientist, and I've based my whole career upon it. So I'm not saying it's a terrible thing, because I've based my career upon it. We've all benefited from it. The problem is, if you apply methodological naturalism to origins, the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of humans, complex animals, what you're subtly doing is pushing anything supernatural off the table, out of consideration. It's not allowed to be considered. And so what's left has to only be natural explanations. And that can be okay if you're openly disclosing that. But if you do it without disclosing it, and you say, science tells us this is how life began, not telling people that you've already pushed any other option off the table, that I think can get kind of misleading. And that's why I put the red flag up there. So if we ask a simple question, like how did the first life begin? In the big picture, there's really two answers to the question. Either life began on its own through purely natural processes, physics and chemistry bumping molecules together, and things got more and more complicated over time. It started being able to reproduce. The molecules reproduce themselves. They got into a membrane, and the whole thing could reproduce itself, and there you have the first living thing. So you either have that, or the other option is there was some supernatural help to it. And in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 11, this is the first time life is mentioned in the Bible. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. Okay, so if you ask science to answer this question, as I mentioned before, that methodological naturalism kicks in, and faith is pushed off the table. It can't be talked about. It's not even a thing. We won't allow that. And what happens subtly here is that the question gets changed. Instead of how did life first begin, the question becomes, what is the best natural explanation for the origin of life? You see the little trick there? And so science is going to answer this question, and people argue, what is the best natural explanation? My idea, your idea, they're going to argue about it. But over here, it just can't be considered. And the problem is then that science, practiced that way, has the risk of leading you away from the truth. You've already blocked out an option. That's a serious, serious bias. And where science will lead you is not necessarily to the truth. I'd prefer it if science was open to leading us to the truth, right? So what's a better approach? What's a better approach than this? The better approach is to keep those two options on the table, look at the evidence, consider the evidence, pick the one that is the most support from the evidence. And this is actually a dichotomy. You can have either nature did it or nature didn't do it. It's a simple dichotomy. So therefore, evidence that goes against this actually serves as evidence for a supernatural intervention doing it. Okay, so I wrote a book about this. Maybe some of you know. This is The Stairway to Life. It's about the origin of life and how science speaks about that. And you might be surprised to find out that people would rather watch a YouTube video that's animated and funny than read a book. So the book has been turned into a series of 8, almost, we're about to release number 9, YouTube videos on the origin of life. And I threw in some snippets here to make it more entertaining than me, because it's actually kind of fun. And in this one, this is just the beginning of talking about the origin of life, giving you a perspective on the importance of what you have observed as far as how life began.
We all know that when a living thing dies, nature takes its course. An irreversible one-way path of decay begins. The bits that the thing was made of, its complex molecules, they start to degrade and become disorganized and smelly. This natural process is unavoidable, and we have all observed it. Surprisingly, some really smart people, from Charles Darwin to scientists today, believe that the opposite process has occurred. They say, a long time ago, purely natural processes somehow created and arranged molecules required for the first ever living organism from a primordial soup, and that led to life as we know it today.
Okay, so many of you are probably familiar with Darwin wrote to his friend and said, maybe there was a puddle full of chemicals and it became proteins that became more and more complicated. So he was thinking in terms of what's called abiogenesis, which is the life coming from non-life. So this is the book, The Stairway to Life. And basically, if you're going to take basic chemicals, just simple molecules, and you want those simple molecules to become a living thing, even the simplest, microscopic, single-cell little living thing, you've got to accomplish all of these things have to be accomplished to get there. And so the book goes through chapter by chapter what it would take, to get through this step, to get through this step. And basically shows you how science, that we know enough to know that science doesn't get you there. And I'm not going to go through the whole book. I'm just going to show you one step, which I think is kind of a fun step. Before that, I want to talk to you about what that video showed us is that we all have observed it. We've all observed natural processes and what they do. And natural processes very strongly pull you down the staircase. It's kind of like a force of gravity, it just sort of sucks you. I'm getting old and I'm feeling it, man. It's just sucking me down. Death and decay goes that way. Everything falls apart and you end up back to being a bunch of chemicals. And there are some people who believe somehow that once, way long ago, the opposite happened. That natural processes somehow carried you up the staircase and got all of this done, right? So I'm just going to touch on one step in the staircase, which I find kind of interesting, and that is the method for repairing biopolymers. So you're all made up of a bunch of biopolymers, which are molecules put in a string, kind of like beads on a necklace. And in all of us, we have DNA, RNA, proteins, polysaccharides. These are polymers built up of little monomers. The challenge is we all know in natural processes, they fall apart. The DNA in you right now, which you all admit is very important, is falling apart. Not just because you're getting old, but just because you're standing here, damage is happening to your DNA. And your body is constantly fixing it. So I'm going to play a couple of video clips that go into that in a little detail, and then show you how the repair happens and has to happen.
Every day, your DNA experiences 10,000 lost single letters of code, and 10,000 cases of damage by oxidation, and 55,000 single strand breaks, as well as 10 of the extremely bad double strand breaks. All of these happen every day in just one of your cells. Just one! Multiply that by the trillions of cells in your body, and I can't emphasize this enough, how in the actual world can we still be alive with our cells basically burning to the ground every second of every day? Great question.
So if you ever go on YouTube and you want to watch these, this is number 8 in the series, and this is what it looks like. And you can, on YouTube, just type in long story short, origin of life, and you'll get all those. So he went through all the damage that's happening to your DNA right now. And we're not just talking about humans here. If you take the simplest known life, the simplest known bacteria, mycoplasma, it has to have mechanisms to fix its DNA. And those are machines that come along, spot an error in the DNA, rip it out, and fix it. And although you have hundreds of ways to fix your biopolymers, very simple life maybe only has a couple of ways, but we're going to go through one of the ways that it fixes DNA that all of life has to have.
The simplest DNA repair mechanism of many is intimidatingly called base excision repair. Fixes a single damaged letter of DNA, and it's needed in every known form of life. If you had a damaged strand of DNA, first, one machine or protein enzyme scans down it and recognizes the single damaged letter. It would detach it from the DNA backbone, extracting it like an old, dirty tooth, leaving the functioning letters alone. Next, another machine detects the empty spot and breaks a single strand of the DNA backbone. A third machine then snips the DNA backbone again, removing the segment of backbone that's empty. These two enzymes have the ability to break the DNA backbone at will. Lucky ducky you, they only do this when needed, and at a specific site of damage. How could enzymes like this just pop up at the start of life without first destroying all of the DNA in sight? A question for the ages. A fourth machine then inserts the replacement part, an intact matching letter of DNA, complete with a new backbone segment. Finally, a fifth machine welds the replacement part to the backbone on both sides, completing the restoration. This is all oversimplified baby talk, of course. The actual mechanics of these things is far beyond what we can convey here. But all this madness is happening every day in every single one of these tiny little danger hot dogs, also known as bacteria. If your reaction to all of this isn't, "What?" then you're just not paying attention. This is literal submicroscopic surgery with the added monkey wrench of the cell does not stop operating while it's being repaired. Imagine trying to repair a Jeep while it's still running. And remember, base excision repair is just one of the many DNA repair pathways, and not even the most complicated one. Even the simplest organisms absolutely need repair mechanisms. The first life and all life needs repair at the very beginning. In bacteria, the instructions to make these 5 enzymes are coded in DNA, requiring more than 8,000 letters of information. If you're smart, you'd notice, just like the scientist Manfred Eigen, that this is a huge paradox. That much DNA could have never accumulated unless it was first protected by repair mechanisms. But the repair mechanisms themselves require at least this much DNA.
Okay, So I hope you get the idea there. Those 5 machines, they're actually enzymes, proteins. They are themselves biopolymers, and they do the work to repair the DNA. But coding for them takes 8,000 letters, kind of like a few pages in a book. But that 8,000 letters of code couldn't exist unless there was repair mechanisms to protect it all the time. So you have this huge paradox, and Manfred Eigen proposed that in 1971, and I haven't seen any answer to that paradox yet. So that's just one of many paradoxes and many challenges. It's only one chapter in the book, full of evidence that natural processes on their own go against the formation of life. So this process, abiogenesis, is what scientists are saying is how life got started. And the problem is that it is unnatural, meaning we know enough about natural processes that things go the opposite way. No one has ever seen things go to life like that. It's unobservable because no one's ever seen it, and it's unscientific. So when we get back to the big picture here, if you're open to allow both of these options on the table and you don't block one out at the beginning, what you find is that the scientific evidence strongly opposes what's over here. If this is not blocked out, then you got to be willing to think that science blocks that one out. Okay, so that was number 1 of the 2 great limitations of science that I'm going to bring up today. Number 2 big limitation, and this is again the way it's practiced, it's not fundamentally a part of science, but scientists sometimes prioritize the wrong kind of evidence. They'll take some evidence and put that way up high and make a big deal of it, and other evidence they'll knock it down and don't talk about that. I work in the field of medicine, and I'm really happy to say that medicine, because it's a life and death thing, everybody here has a relative or themselves that we're very dependent upon medicine to be here tonight. Because medicine is life and death, they took the science pretty serious behind it. Not to say that it's perfect, not to say it doesn't make mistakes, but they take it pretty seriously. And all doctors have gotten together to agree in a prioritization of evidence. Some evidence is given top priority, some evidence is really low on the chain. So if I come up with a new drug and I say this pill is going to cure cancer, if I show up with evidence that's up here, the FDA and society will say, yeah, it looks like your drug cures cancer. That's pretty convincing evidence up here. And we don't have to go into all the details of what it is. I'm just trying to say they've taken the time to prioritize and make a nice scale that works pretty well. Notice down here at the bottom of the chain is consensus of expert opinion. Imagine that. Experts state this pill can cure your cancer. That's not good enough. It's just somebody's opinion. Everybody makes mistakes, right? It's not as good as a randomized controlled trial up there. So what I wish is that all science had a scale like this of prioritization, because otherwise you get stuff upside down. And this is especially true in the world of evolution. So my first book, Scientific Approach to Evolution, is about part of it is explaining how to do this prioritization for all of science, not just medicine, all of science. And basically there's 6 criteria I bring in, and those 6 criteria help you to decide, is this something I can trust in, or is this something I really shouldn't trust in? And it's not black and white, it's a color scale, you see. It's a nice smooth scale. And so the 6 criteria, I'll go through them pretty quickly because a lot of them are pretty obvious. And it helps you. I would like everybody here to go home with these in their head, because tomorrow you're going to turn on the news and it's going to say something like, scientists found life on Mars, or whatever they're going to say. And you can apply those 6 criteria to get a feel for how much you trust what they said, okay? Hopefully that's something you can apply. Criteria number 1 is that it's repeatable. That's pretty obvious, right? If something can be repeated, you gain confidence. So if I take an object and I want to study how fast does this object fall when I drop it, right? I could do that, make my measurement. If I do that and then you do that and you get the same answer, and you do that, you get the same answer, somebody in Japan does that, they get the same answer, the confidence goes up with each repetition, right? And that's really high confidence at that point. That's pretty obvious. Number two is something that's directly measurable, meaning that you can exactly see what you're working with, you know how fast it falls, you know when it hits the ground. It's pretty direct. When I was a kid and I'd go to my mom and say, Mom, I feel sick, and my mom would measure temperature with an indirect method, right? This is indirect, it's not high confidence. The direct method is a lot better confidence. If you want to study a black hole in outer space, how are you going to do direct measurements? You can't measure much of anything directly from it. You measure stuff around it or the effects it has on other things. So that inherently makes it lower confidence. Okay, number three is about prospective study. This one might be a little more subtle. This is about designing your experiment in advance, planning out all the details, and then do your experiment. That's prospective. The opposite is retrospective. I'm just going to watch a video somebody made about some of the experiment and, get my conclusions out of that. What's the benefit of being prospective? If you do it prospectively, you design the experiment and you can push aside any of the confounding factors, anything that's going to confuse the results. So let's say I want to drop my object and measure how fast it's going to fall. I want to design in advance that there's no big tornado, there's no wind blowing, it's going to mess up the results. It would even be better if I pull all the air out of the room, right? Then you actually have a true result of how fast it's going to fall. That's prospective study. Number four is to avoid bias. I think everybody knows we want to avoid bias, right? And we're all guilty of bias. I'm biased, everybody's biased. Bias is kind of like the glasses you look through in life, and they're always there, and everything you perceive is through those glasses. That's your bias, and we all have it. When I write a protocol in my research, I'm going to study cancer or something, I have to have a section that says how I'm going to avoid bias, what I'm going to actively do to get bias out of the picture here. And something like randomized controlled trials are a good way to do that. So watch out for bias. It's always bad. Number five is to avoid assumptions. Again, we all like to make assumptions. Assumptions are like shortcuts. Save you time, save you money. But they can get in the way. Especially bad if you don't disclose the assumptions that you've made. So I want to drop this object and measure how fast it falls. And like I said, it'd be good if we could get the air out of the room here. But that's going to cost about $4 million, and it's going to take 6 months to build the structure and get all the air out of the room. So can we just assume that the air in the room is not a big deal? That happens all the time in science. It's not because you're cheating, it's because you're being practical, and you got to get the job done. You can't spend all the money in the world to come up with your answer. And it's okay if you disclose it and then try to justify those assumptions. But if you hide them and you don't talk about them, that's not really good. Bad. Number six. Number six is when you kind of wrap up your study and you conclude what you found. You got to make reasonable claims that fit within the way the study was designed and how it was tested and so forth. To explain this, I'd like to talk about nuts. This is a can of nuts that you could buy in the store today, Diamond almonds. And I found it really interesting that they put this little disclaimer on the can. It says, scientific evidence suggests, but does not prove, that eating nuts may reduce the risk of heart disease. You see, the people who market these nuts, they'd like you to eat more nuts. And so they'd love to put a claim on there like, you eat these nuts, you live forever. That's what they want to put on there. But the FDA is like, no, you got to make a reasonable claim. And they scrounged around their data and they're like, what do we got? We got any proof that nuts make you live longer? And they came up with this, which is fine. It's honest, it's reasonable, and it's not stretching the truth. So I appreciate those nuts. I think that's good. Contrast that with this statement, which was in my son's high school biology textbook. 10th grade biology textbook. Organisms as dissimilar as humans and bacteria share genes inherited from a very distant common ancestor. Now, first thing you might notice in there is there's no hedging terms like we think, we suspect, maybe, might be. This is kind of like a very confident statement somebody's making. They're 100% confident in the statement. And that concerns me. And we're going to dig into this statement quite a bit in a minute. But it also concerns me that we live in a society that is concerned about claims made about nuts. But our society doesn't really care about claims made about evolution like that. We don't hold it to the same standard. That's kind of surprising. Okay, so we now have our criteria for low confidence or high confidence. So if we ask science a question, I hope all of you will go home and be able to think this through to say, can science answer that with great confidence or medium low or low? So one question that we've already kind of knocked out of the park here, science really does well for a question like, how fast does an object fall? Right? You can do it repeatably, directly measure, prospective. There's not a lot of bias here because it's not like I'm going to make $1 million if I'm right and you're not right. You know, there's no bias. Not a lot of assumptions here. And if you make reasonable claims, an unreasonable claim would be like, I drop this, I measure the speed, it falls, therefore on the moon, it's going to fall at the same speed, right? I didn't study it on the moon. That's an unreasonable claim. So let's pop up that sentence I just pulled out of my son's biology textbook. Organisms as dissimilar as humans and bacteria share genes inherited from a very distant common ancestor. That's like answering a question of, do humans and bacteria share genes that came from a common ancestor? So we want to ask science that question. And the first part is it repeatable? And I already gave you the answer. You can't take a bacteria, put it in the lab, sit around and have it turn into a human and repeat that process. That would give you a lot of confidence, wouldn't it? Can't be done. Is it directly observable? Has anybody ever seen a bacteria turn into anything but a bacteria? No. Nobody's witnessed the actual event. Can you study it prospectively? You'd have to put it in the lab, plan out your experiment. Nobody's ever seen such thing. So it's very, very retrospective. Do you think there's any bias? Is there any bias involved in that? There's tons of bias. Well, and then many assumptions are required as well, because basically the whole statement is an assumption. It is true. It is a fact that we have some genes that look similar, very close to some genes that are in a bacteria. So that's a fact. But saying they came from a common ancestor is an assumption built into this statement. So basically the whole statement is an assumption, and it's not disclosed. Like, hey, we're going to start by assuming that we have common ancestry. It just makes that statement. And so then we have overstated claims as well. You can see this is kind of dripping with confidence, even though it isn't. So this statement belongs way down there on the low confidence side. And I've trained myself over the years, so just reading stuff, I see something like that statement and I just pop up a red flag because I know it doesn't fit any of the confidence levels that I'd like to see, or stuff that I'm held to in my job as a scientist. I'm held to more confident kind of stuff over here. Okay, so now if we're going to apply science to origins, origin of the universe, origin of life, origin of man, we need to appreciate these levels of confidence like medicine does. And the high confidence evidence needs to be prioritized, and low confidence is kind of pushed aside. That's the right way to do it. That's what the FDA does when they consider giving you medicine or not. Okay, so let's apply this now. So the origin of complex life, like you. Of course, science seems to be telling us that a single cell, through the tree of life branched off. Much more complicated than this, of course, but we end up with modern life that way. And faith-wise, the Bible tells us about how God created different forms of life according to their kinds. So what evidence do we have then? If we're open, remember we have to be open to consider both sides. We're going to take the evidence, see where the evidence leads us, right? So what evidence do we have to support big-scale evolution? What evidence do we have for this being the case? And it's kind of interesting when you go to a biology textbook, high school biology textbook, or even the scientific literature, there's a big focus on really 4 key areas. which are the fossil record. You're familiar with that. Geographic distribution, like why are there no penguins here in Minnesota? And why are living things over there and not over here, okay? Vestigial organs, like your appendix. And comparing different life forms, sometimes with a fancy name of homology. Like if you look at my arm and I have one bone here and two bones here and then 5 fingers, bats have that, rats have that, dogs have the same kind of structure. It's homologous. And you can look at DNA. So like a gene that bacteria has, humans have a similar kind of gene. Comparison of life forms is considered evidence. And our friend Richard Dawkins, you'll hear him speak to these, and it's interesting to listen to which one of these is his favorite, most convincing.
Out of all the evidence used to support the theory of evolution, what would you say is the strongest, most irrefutable single piece of evidence in support of the theory?
There's an enormous amount of evidence from all sorts of places, and it's hard to pick one strand which is more important than any other. There's fossils, there's the evidence from geographical distribution, there's the evidence from vestigial organs. I think, to me, perhaps the most compelling evidence is comparative evidence from modern animals, particularly biochemical comparative evidence, genetic, molecular evidence.
Okay, so probably you heard him go through those 4 things, and he was asked which is his favorite, and this was his absolute favorite. Not just favorite, but it's the most compelling. This is the best evidence I got. Okay? Well, guess what? The statement that we just talked about for quite a while, that bacteria and humans share genes inherited from a common ancestor, this is a statement about comparison of life forms. That's what it is. You're comparing bacteria and humans. And we already went through that one and said that it fails all 6 of the criteria, fails them pretty badly, all 6 of the criteria for high confidence. So basically the best data that they got, it's the best stuff I got, and it fails all 6 of these criteria. In fact, all of these forms of evidence fail all 6 of those criteria, and that's detailed quite a bit in this book. It goes through how that works. I'm not going to go through it, but all of this is surprisingly very low confidence evidence, which leads you to think, okay, is there any higher confidence evidence? Is there any high confidence evidence about macroevolution? And there certainly is evidence out there that touches upon this, and I'll go through a little bit of it with you. There's a lot in the book too. So there's a guy named Richard Lenski, and he has devoted his life to reproducing bacteria. And he's gone through more than 70,000 generations of E. coli bacteria in a lab. Every day they go in and they transfer some to another little vial, and it grows 7 generations, and they transfer it and they transfer it. And his goal was to show the evolution that goes on in that situation. And when he got to about 33,000 generations, took over 10 years, and he had to grow 10 trillion bacteria to do that, suddenly the bacteria developed the ability to eat something called citrate. So it's a molecule that was in their little bath, and they hadn't before used that as an energy source. All of a sudden, they got twice the food in the bath, and they took over, and they were like, awesome! And it was a big deal. And Richard Dawkins, this is in the book, The Blind Watchmaker, a quote from him. He said, "This is a beautiful demonstration of evolution in action. It's new information entering genomes and combinations of new genes." And that's exactly what he wanted it to be. The problem is he actually wrote that book, and it was published before they did the genetic analysis. So you could take the bacteria after 33,000 generations and analyze the DNA and look at it, and take the original DNA from generation number 1 and pull them together and look at it and say, what has changed here? And it turned out, these 2 papers show it in detail, but one gene that already existed was duplicated. It's just copied over here instead of over there. They have 2 copies now. And another gene, the bacteria lost control over when it was used. It was only used previously if there was no oxygen around, it would turn on that gene. Now it turns it on all the time. So it lost control over when to turn it on. And hopefully you get it. What I'm saying here is that there's not a lot of new information. There's no new genes. It's the same information. It just got, one part was broken and one part was copied. And so I think Richard Dawkins got this pretty wrong. And it's actually, the key part of this is that this meets all the criteria for high confidence. It's repeatable, it's prospectively designed, it's directly measured. You take the DNA here, and look at it, bias and assumptions. And so the high confidence evidence in this big study is telling us that evolution is pretty constrained, right? After 70,000 generations, which would be something like 2 million years of human, generations. And not much important has changed in there. Most of what changed actually is things going downhill, things falling apart. Here's another piece of evidence. This again meets those 6 criteria. It's repeatable, it's prospectively studied, it's directly measurable. Bacteria can use this enzyme, it's a big protein, and they use that to manufacture this, tryptophan, which is necessary for life. And these guys were pretty smart, and they thought, we're going to do a little test of evolution. We're going to see if it can succeed in meeting the test, getting an A on the test, okay? So they took the DNA to make this gene. It's actually 2 genes. And they changed 1 letter. They changed 1 letter of DNA out of 2,000 letters. And it turns out that that led to an enzyme that was halfway broken. Didn't work as well as the perfect one. And they said, okay, let's try and see if this bacteria can evolve to fix that 1 mistake. And it did. It didn't take very long either. So at one point, somehow the bacteria copied its DNA, made a mistake that actually was a good mistake, made the thing functional again, and they took over the population. It was evolution of a single base pair of DNA. And he said, okay, good, we did that. Let's now try 2. So they changed the same letter again, and then they added another error. So 2 out of 2,000 letters were changed. That time, they actually grew 10,000 generations of bacteria in a lab, and it did not fix the problem. This never came back to function. It could not evolve its way out of that difficulty. In fact, the bacteria just sort of jettisoned the gene or stopped using it at all, because it was better energetically to just sort of push that aside than to try to make a broken gene and try to fix it. So basically, they kind of found the edge, if you will, of what evolution can accomplish in this situation. And this is all high confidence. It meets all those criteria. And I'll do a little summary here then, that evolution, in this case, evolution failed to repair a gene that you already gave it 99.9% completeness. It just had to tip it over the edge, and it couldn't do it. So if it couldn't fix it starting with 99% there, then how could it ever have evolved from a lot less than 99%, right? Impossible. Okay, another little tidbit is we've been doing mice research on mice for 95 years, and they've done all kind of stuff to mice. This little guy over here actually has 6 legs. Crazy, right? But the things stubbornly remain mice. They either end up dead or they end up mice. And 95 years of trying that, there's limits there. Things are stuck. Same for fruit flies, for zebrafish, for domestic animals like dogs. You can breed dogs and make new breeds all the time. And of course, they're still dogs. And then there's very recent results. This is just from July of this year. I popped it in because it's very fresh. But there's this tiny little microorganism, Daphnia pulex, right? And they studied it for 10 years, and they look at the DNA and what changed over 10 years. And this is out in the wild. It's not in a laboratory. But they concluded that the average effect of natural selection over 10 years was close to 0. They couldn't really find anything important that has changed. And this is all, again, repeatable, prospective, directly measurable, all that stuff. So I'm wrapping it up now. We get back to this big question. We have 2 options, and we're open to following the evidence where the evidence goes. And if you stack up the evidence, we got Richard Dawkins over here with evidence that I think is extremely low confidence, and the evidence that actually fits the high confidence criteria is stacked over here in favor of faith. And I kind of use the word faith there a little tongue-in-cheek because it's not blind faith, it's faith that's backed by science, I think, right? So that's where we're at. So those are the two limitations of science. If science is your God, you're going to ignore those and think that it's infallible and it tells us all the answers. That's a danger. So when it comes to origins, like the origin of the universe, origin of first life, origin of complicated life, I think, this is my thesis, this is my solution to the battle, is that science is being abused by society to provoke this battle that doesn't need to be there. It's an unnecessary conflict. So this conflict is solvable if we simply apply science properly. We recognize its limitations and we don't kick God off from the start. So here's the title slide. Now you know the answer, right? Science and faith are actually friends if you do the science right. That's the point of the talk. So I am done. I'm just going to show you these materials so you can have it. This is the videos I hope you all get to watch because they're all out there for free. I'm happy to take any questions online or questions here. And my webpage is also a good way to get to the videos or to see the books. And the books are for sale over there also after the talk.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Well put together, well delivered. And wouldn't it be nice if this information was more prevalent in our society, right? In our communities, in our culture, in our families, even our churches. And we're going to give you a chance to do that. But thank you for doing this, Doc. And also thank you for the people who've donated in the past. You have a chance to fund the next speakers. So thank you. You guys are doing a great job. This is one of the biggest creation clubs in America. And so good job. Let's keep building on it. And if we want this to be more prevalent in our families and churches and communities, we're going to give you a chance. We're starting a TCCSA Action. This is for people that want to get more equipped. You know, two emails and one talk isn't enough. You want to get more information. You want to know what's happening. You want these videos as soon as they're released, and typically it's a day or two later. It says, you know, if you knew somebody, would this be a blessing to anybody you know? You know, and it's like, yeah, and we can get it in your hands in a day or two, and then you can be able to share it. And so to be part of this TCCSA Action, it's going to be a perk for the people who are members. It's $20 to be a member for the year. Down in Houston, it's $50. Okay, $20 if you get become a member now till it'll go cover it all of next year, and we'll get your email, and you'll get special emails. You know, Rossi wants to have a team of prayer warriors, and we should be, you know, we can pray over this because we're in a spiritual battle, and you can talk to Ross. He's the one over on Zoom right now, and so then if you might want your contact information, so he can tell you specifically what to pray for, and we can all pray. And prayer is very important. But at some point in time, David had to pick up a stone. And there's a time for action too. And that's when you can talk to me and I'll get your email, and then we'll let you know when things are happening. Like last year, there was, we put together a creation tour in one day at the Como Zoo. Somebody was in town, spur of the moment. We put together a tour, and one day we had 30 or 40 people there. And that's something that you'd be able to do with this action thing. And so if you want to get more involved, and you might say, well, I don't have any skill, what can I do? It's, you know, I'm not a people person. That's okay. There's a lot of details. And I'm not a detail. I don't know what a calendar is. I can't read a clock. You know, I'm a pretty, I like to deal with people. There's a lot of things we can do there. And it's like, well, no, I just like being on my phone. I don't want doing any of that. Well, yeah, you can share. You know, we can share this stuff online. You know, we can use everybody. God's given us all gifts that we can use, and we get the greatest joy from using our gifts to glorify God. And we look at this world, and the world is a mess because there's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies, right? And ground zero for that battle, I believe, is creation. And I was at Bethel today. I had a table there. None of you knew about it because we didn't have a way to communicate. But if you want to know when you have these opportunities to get involved, you know, and it's not so much that, you know, what am I going to do? It's like, well, are you reporting for duty? Can God use you in this area? And so at $20, and that'll be covered for the whole year, we'll put you on a special email list, and we'll send you out good creation information. We'll send you out other places, like, you know, and we can get these tables at Bethel. And we used to get them at Northwestern. That's kind of up in the air right now. But it's so much fun. That college ministry is so much fun, and I'd love to show people the ropes like somebody showed me the ropes, and it's so much fun. And even the president of Bethel came and talked to me today. And he was glad that I was there. And so that's exciting. And so what we need, right now we've got maybe 8, maybe 9 people that do stuff for TCCSA. What if we had 80 or 90 or 800 or 900 or 8,000 or 9,000? You think we could make a bigger impact in this community? And we're just asking people to do a little bit more. A little bit more. If we got a little bit more focused, a little bit more organized, I think we could make a huge difference. And I think the challenge we have is a lot of people think, well, somebody else will take care of that. Well, if everybody thinks like that, nobody will take care of that. And we look at our culture and we're getting steamrolled. It's amazing what's in our textbooks. It's amazing what they're teaching our kids. And if you're fed up with it, let's do a little bit. And put your name on, let's get involved, and let's see what God does. Because our availability is way more important than our ability. You know, who can God use in this battle? And it's a fun battle. And, you know, are we going to have any battle stories when we get to heaven? And so I'm just encouraging people to just do a little bit more. You know, if you want to be on this email list, the TCCSA Action, I think this would be a great starting point. And then we'll just ask God to bless these efforts. And so let's see what's coming up. We've got that next month is Richard Broadberry, The Miracles of the Highest God in Ancient China. So this is going to be a Zoom event, and you can give online. If you're watching online and you want to donate, you can go into, let's see, we've got a Give, Send, Go, not a Give, Send, Go. Yeah, it is Give, Send, Go. TCCSA, if you're watching online and this benefits you, that's the neat thing about Zoom and YouTube. People all around the world can see this stuff. We've gotten emails from Africa, right? Yeah, and so if you guys want to donate, Give, Send, Go at TCCSA. That would be a blessing. And for you local people, that's incredible. You're doing a great job. And then if you can share this stuff, you know, if this has been a blessing to you, let it shine. Don't put it under a bushel. Let it shine. That's what we're supposed to be. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And our Heavenly Father is a great creator. And it's such a powerful tool. I go to St. Cloud State all the time. And it's like, do you believe in blind chance or a creator? That's the two options. Blind chance. That takes a lot of faith. And we just want to equip the next generation to stand up to this evolutionary dogma. And again, if you make it next week, we're going to take December off, and then January, February, we got some big ones coming in. You're going to love that. But let's see, I think I've probably taken enough time. And Q&A, speak loudly so that the microphones can pick it up. And again, you guys are doing a great job. I'm excited to see what we can do. And I just encourage people to just do a little bit more, just a little bit. And just think, if it's going to happen, it's up to the person in the mirror. You know, let's just all do a little bit. So thank you so much.
Okay, questions? Steve. Hi there.
Rob.
Steve came all the way Steve came from Roseville to give me a challenge. So.
As a retired science teacher, this will make you happy. It's not just, well, this is for good teachers, like I was. It's not just a science textbook that's plunked down in front of the kids. The teacher does some stuff in addition. For example, a textbook might say a very simple sentence that humans and dinosaurs did not live at the same time. But a science teacher, if a kid asks about, well, how do we know that? And a science teacher would say, well, here's why we would say that. And we would expand on what has been found in the fossil record. So it's a little bit more than just what the textbooks spit out. And I would also like to ask you about your dichotomy there. It was like the branching bush or the tree of life, and that's the evolution side, right? And then on the other side, you had some Bible verses from Genesis. and that's the, correct me if I'm wrong, correct me. That would be the side that believes that everything was just zapped into existence on a particular day 6,000 years ago. That's that side, right?
Well, the way I explained, I know I put those verses up there, but the point was either nature did it, which is the evolution side, or nature didn't do it. You could be a Muslim, you could be a Buddhist, whatever. The point is nature did it or nature didn't do it is the dichotomy.
Okay.
It's not that...
Let me take the left side.
Yeah.
Well, both of those would be theories, and both of those would then, because they're theories, would make a prediction. That tree of life side, the evolution side, that would predict what you might find in the fossil record. Would you agree?
Depending on how you interpret the fossils.
Okay, as you would go, well, the prediction would be if there was simpler life, and now there's different and more complex. The theory of evolution would say, as you went deeper into the fossil record, you would find less creatures like today. The life forms you would find as you go deeper would be less and less recognizable. On the other side, as you go deep into the fossil record, everything should look pretty much the same. Which is correct? Which do scientists find in the fossil record?
Yeah, if life all over the world was well distributed, so all life was all places, all on the earth, then maybe buried in layers, you would expect to find the same life throughout all the layers. But if you have sections of the world that are tropical, jungle, whatever, and oceans and different ecologies, then you'd expect the stuff that lived there to be buried, and then so over here or on top of it, something else buried, and that's what I think we see in the record. Also, prediction-wise, don't you think Richard Lenski would have predicted that 70,000 generations of bacteria would have evolved into something instead of just sort of actually degrading was what mostly happened? He put his whole life into that, and that's prospective, and that's repeatable. You can't repeat the fossil record. You can't.
Exactly.
Right, so that's pretty low confidence stuff. Question?
What was your YouTube channel where we can get those?
Long Story Short is the name of it.
That's the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Long Story Short.
It's also on Discovery Science YouTube channel, same things. Yeah. And number 9 should be out in a couple of weeks, I hope. That one is on, it's actually on this book. It goes into that book somewhat. So. Other questions? Back here?
How did you get interested in this debate? Were you interested in it as a student?
Well, I feel like God's given me a bit of a platform, and I'm grateful to Him for that because I enjoy science quite a bit, and I've pursued it through my life and career and so forth. And then, this kind of stuff was inspired by, like I mentioned, my son in high school biology class. And at that time, I was going through a review with the FDA, and the FDA was picking on us about the level of confidence in the evidence we were presenting to support this product. And then I picked up my son's biology textbook and started to read that and put it through the same kind of criteria that I was being held to. And that was sort of a moment of revelation. I got to write a book on this because I got kind of angry about it, that this story of evolution is being held to a very different standard. And that started the process. Yep.
It seems like many creation scientists believe that the layers were caused by the flood, with the flood coming up and making various layers. Do you agree with that idea?
Personally, yes, I do. I mean, that's a bit off the topic of this, but school textbooks and maybe Steve will give you the feeling maybe, I'm not speaking for it. No, they give you the feeling that you dig down the earth and you see the perfect layers laid out that are just like the cartoon in the textbook where you see layers laid out. But it's really not, there's no place where they're laid out quite perfectly like that. There's stuff missing, there's stuff over here and stuff over here, and they have to work quite hard to pull stuff together to make that full story, if you will. It's not as clean as you might think. Anybody else? Yes, hi.
What's the latest on DNA evidence? I mean, I've heard that the study of DNA, like they came out and said, well, it looks like we came from common ancestors. They talk about.
Yeah, so.
Is that something that's still going on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Richard Dawkins says the most convincing evidence for him is if you look at DNA of the different life forms, he believes you could build a tree based on that DNA. It's called phylogeny, of matching genes for one kind of life and genes for another kind of life. And but what they often don't talk about are the differences. See, they're focused at kind of cherry picking, focusing on similarities, like bacteria has this gene, humans have a gene. Look at that, it's really, really close. They don't talk about the differences so much, which often are called orphan genes, sometimes called taxonomically restricted genes. But humans have a bunch of genes that no other animal, no chimp, nobody has except us. And basically every form of life has its superpowers. You know, it's things like a jellyfish has these little exploding cells, and they send toxin, they poison you through these little exploding cells. And that's a pretty special power that I wish I had. You know, the bombardier beetle can send explosive gas out of its back end. I wish I could do that too. It's kind of cool. But those special skills, if you trace them down to what gives it that special skill, almost always you're going to find it's what's called orphan genes, which means no other form of life has that piece of DNA, that gene, and nothing homologous, nothing that you can even say, oh, that's pretty close, you know. So again, it depends on how you approach the argument from the beginning. You can make an argument, there's a lot of similarities if you push aside the differences. Yeah?
I wasn't sure how to prepare. I knew what the topic of the discussion or of your talk tonight was, but I wanted to come prepared somewhat, but I wasn't sure how to do that. But I was listening to the radio the other day, and there was two different people talking. They weren't necessarily debating, but they were discussing this: order or no order. Which one is it? What do we see evidence for? Order or no order? Okay. And so it was interesting listening to them. They went back and forth. At a certain point, one person said, well, Francis Crick, he was the guy who discovered RNA or DNA, right? And I think he's not with us anymore, right? But the person remembered, well, what did he say about the origin of life? How did life evolve on Earth? And the person said, well, Crick said that it had to come from outer space somewhere, and so it came from out there, and it splashed and it came to Earth, and then life started. So that's, and I never read a biography of this guy or not, but I know that he's famous or whatever, and he lived in my lifetime. And I thought, oh wow, it's amazing how science is always, once you answer one question, that gives rise to many more questions. Instead of fewer questions, you get more and more questions. Anyways, is that comment about order or no order, and then what Crick said, how does that fit in with what you talked about tonight? I don't know if it does or not, but I thought that's the only thing that came in my head.
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind is life is very, very ordered, extremely organized. It's also in a very high energy state. So the next video I'm working on is on thermodynamics, which speaks to that. Basically, that life being extremely organized in a very high energy state is a very unnatural place to be. Natural processes don't get you to very organized high energy state. So there's tons of order in life, and it's very much against natural processes. It's called far from equilibrium. And we're all far from equilibrium all the time because I keep eating cheeseburgers and I'm still alive and I'm driving it far from equilibrium all the time.
Yeah. The only belief that I came here with is that I believe what the Bible says about God creating the world in 6 days and then he rested on the seventh. And the fact that the world as we know it, the earth as we know it, was created before man was created. And so that's the only belief that I came to here with. And so and then that's all confirmed. But anyways, I appreciate you answering my question.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep.
The other question people have brought up is the version of information. Because there's so very much information in DNA. Where do you get that without having any kind of discuss?
Right, the order of information. And that video I played with the repair mechanisms, and there were 8,000 letters of code. Right. You try to get that from a random process. Right. Information doesn't just pop up. Good point. Yes, Ross.
Another really interesting bit of evidence in the last several decades is finding intact blood cells and blood vessels in fossils that are thought to be hundreds of millions of years old. The process would say they should have hit their expiration date.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Everything falls apart pretty quickly, and to say that the dinosaur red blood cells have been around, sitting in the ground inside a bone for 68 million years, is a lot to expect, because things fall apart pretty quickly. We're all pretty much experts at how things fall apart, right? We know how that works. Yep, over there. Yes, you? Yep.
Yeah, oh, okay. Have you had a chance to formally debate evolutionists, and how was the experience?
You know, I find a lot of debates are more like sporting events, and it's more like the winner is the one that has the best slam and that kind of stuff. And so I like to go into things more like, let's try to find the truth together, you know, and it's rare to find a debate scenario where that's going on. So I kind of avoid the smackdown kind of things. And but if I find someone that's willing to have an open, like seeking truth kind of debate, I'd be happy to do that. It's hard to find today because people are entertained by the smackdown. That's what they like. You know? Yep.
I take it you're familiar with The Language of God by Francis Collins?
Yeah.
Would you reference him in your works, or is it more likely he'd reference you in his?
Oh, he's a big guy. He wouldn't reference me. Francis Collins is very much a theistic evolutionist, right? So that means he totally accepts molecules to man evolution, and somehow thinks God is somehow, I don't know, involved somehow. And he's very, very outspoken about that. So he has a very different perspective than I do. Yep.
Well, kind of following your scale of confidence, it always disturbs me when they call it a theory of evolution, because it has not attained the level of theory. It should be the hypothesis of evolution, because there's not enough data or evidence to ever attain the level of theory.
I agree with you, but we're not having much impact, are we? Got to change the world. Yes?
Is evolution possible when you have entropy?
Entropy meaning things falling apart and natural. Yeah.
Everything is degrading.
Well, I do think, you know, like I had that experiment up there where one letter of DNA was changed and the bacteria benefited from that. And if you want to call that evolution, okay. I mean, it's very, very, very constrained and minimal. And that can happen because the living thing is already alive. It's already far from an equilibrium state. So it can do that. So if you say that's defeating entropy, maybe on a very, very small scale. Yeah. Yep.
Hi, thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Wondering what you think, just curious about the similarity between like chimpanzee DNA human DNA?
Yeah, there's many, many debates out there over that topic. So of course, chimp DNA and human DNA is close. And supposedly we had a common ancestor that was neither human nor chimp. It was the common ancestor that diverged then from that. And there's a big debate going on to try to quantify how similar the DNA is. And a lot of textbooks and media will say 98.5 or 98.8, something like that, % similar. It's extremely hard to put one number to that, you know? Is your Chevy truck and my Honda Civic 82% similar or 79? How are you supposed to come up with one number to do that? It's extremely difficult, and people debate over it. But I have already mentioned orphan genes, which is genetic material that humans have that nobody else has anything like it. And there's a fair amount of that. Certainly millions of letters of code. So there's quite a divergence between us in that sense. But putting a single number on it is really tough. So I hesitate to just spit out a number. But I would say it's likely close to 90 or in the 90s, but people debate that all the time. I'm not sure why it really matters much to put a number on it like that. Yeah. Yes?
I did hear that the DNA that they compared is just a section of the gene and not the whole thing. And
Right.
So that could be part of the explanation, because I've heard that we're actually closer to other animals than gorillas, and there really isn't all that much in common, but you have to think about it. If we both have blood, if we both have arms, you know, there's so much that is similar, and you know, God repeated a pattern in us, but we're special.
Yep. Every time I work on a new pacemaker or something, I start with the old one and try to make it a little better, right? So there's a lot of similarity in the design. It makes sense. Yep.
Just from square one, like, do most evolutionists just believe that life came from a singularity, one single cell? I mean, you know, you think about it, it's like, for life to generate from one single cell and then even multiply spontaneously, just a lot of cells happen at once, but it's like, I mean, I don't even get the idea like plants, plant life versus, you know, human life or like animal life. They always differentiate between that too, and it's like, that doesn't even fit, you know. It's like, I don't have sap running through my veins, you know, or something like that, but it's like, do you understand what I'm trying to say there? I mean, it's kind of, it's like, if it all comes from the same cell and they're similar, there's a similarity somehow. It's like, I just can't understand or fathom like how plants can be like people.
How plants can be
real. From the same cell, you know,
Yeah.
from the same original singularity. You know what I mean?
Right. There's a lot.
That makes no sense.
Right, I'm with you. For the origin of life, scientists will tell a story of how chemicals came together, and a very important step in that would be a molecule that could reproduce itself. So a so-called chemical evolution is a molecule that could reproduce itself. And most people, if you Google that, they'll tell you that it's happened. In the lab, they found a molecule that can reproduce itself, but it's never the case. They've never found a molecule that can reproduce itself, except if they borrow enzymes from living things and put that into their petri dish, then they can get stuff to be reproduced that way.
I just think, you know, there is that bias there that we're always talking about, the protein life or the,
Yeah.
you know, or whatever you want to call it, versus like plant life. I mean, they're just so different, you know, and it's like, I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to assume that things come from a single cell and then somehow generate both types of life. I mean, it's kind of weird.
It goes against intuition,
Yeah,
right?
it doesn't really make sense to me. So.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, anything else? Yep.
How have you seen the response to what you've been talking about in other places? Or?
You can imagine it's a very dichotomous response. book reviews are either 5 or 1, right? And the videos there, we have over 1 million views. And the comments are, again, a dichotomy. There's people who would just rip it up and other people who love it, and there's not much in the middle. So that's the response, kind of as expected. You know?
Do they let you advertise these new books? I heard they kind of shut down the advertising when they found out it promoted creation.
Well, I tried to advertise on the website of the National Association of Biology Teachers, and they shut that down right before it was to come out. They wouldn't allow that on there, but it can be advertised on Amazon. There's little suggestions come up and stuff like that. Yeah. All right, thanks everybody for coming. I'm happy to take questions.